They are not panicking. That is the first thing you notice. The lights went out 11 minutes ago, and this household is moving, quietly, deliberately, without a single raised voice. What they are doing in these first minutes is not what most people would do. And the reason they can do it comes down to something that research calls the blind window. In documented grid-down scenarios, the average unprepared household loses functional decision-making capacity within 18 to 22 minutes of losing power. Not from danger, but from information blackout. These people know what that window is, and they decided, long before tonight, exactly what to do inside it. Step 1. The radio goes on first. An outsider watching this household would notice one thing immediately. Before anyone checks a phone, before anyone looks out the window, before anyone says a word about what just happened, a hand crank radio comes off the wall and goes on. It is the first physical action. It happens within 60 seconds. What drives that action is a doctrine that most people have never encountered. FEMA's own preparedness framework classifies the first hour of any major event as the assessment and stabilization phase. Intelligence gathering, not resource deployment, not evacuation, not securing anything. Listening first. The prepper community did not invent this. The military uses it. Emergency management uses it. The reason it is not common knowledge is that movies never show the hero turning on a radio. They show the hero running. The consequence of skipping this step is not minor. Households that act before they understand the event type make the single most dangerous class of mistake in documented crisis behavior. They bug out when they should stay, or they shelter when they should move. The radio takes 90 seconds. It classifies the event as local, regional, or national, short duration, or indefinite. That classification determines every decision that follows. You do not need to own a prepper radio today to understand this. You need to understand that the first move is always to know before you act. Step 2. The card on the wall. The second thing an outsider would notice is a piece of paper, laminated, mounted on the wall near the kitchen. One of the household members walks directly to it. They do not discuss what to do next. They read. Crisis psychology research documents something that most people find uncomfortable to accept. In the first 10 to 15 minutes of a sudden high-stress event, between 70 and 80% of people enter a behaviorally inactive state. Not panic. Stillness. Researcher John Leach, writing in Survival Psychology, documented this across military and civilian disaster data. The brain under acute stress does not perform. It stalls. Experienced preppers know this, and they design around it. The laminated card is not a reminder. It is a cognitive prosthetic. It is designed to be executable by someone who is not thinking clearly, because that is exactly who will be reading it. What is on the card matters less than the fact that it exists. It has numbered steps. It has assigned roles, one person on communications, one on inventory, one on exterior check. It designates a decision maker so that no one is waiting for someone else to lead. Researchers studying post-Katrina household behavior found consistent conflict and paralysis in the first 20 minutes among households without pre-assigned roles. That paralysis does not resolve on its own. Time lost in the first hour in documented long-duration scenarios does not come back. You can write your version of that card tonight. One page, posted somewhere visible. That single act moves a household from the reactive majority into the group you are watching right now. Step 3. The phone assumption is already gone. Here is where the camera moves inside, and what you find there is a mental model most people have never been asked to hold. This household is not trying to call anyone, not yet. They already know and have known for years that their phone will not work. Not because it is broken, because the network is gone. Cellular infrastructure saturates within 15 to 45 minutes of a major event, not from physical damage, from overload. Everyone reaching for their phone at the same time. On September 11th, cellular networks in New York were effectively unusable within minutes. In Texas in February 2021, when 4.5 million households lost power in freezing temperatures, network congestion compounded the blackout. The phone in your hand is a consumer device built for normal conditions. It is not built for the moment everyone needs it simultaneously. What this household has instead is a pre-established out-of-state contact. One person, agreed upon in advance, who becomes the communication hub. Family members in different locations are both trying to reach the same single person rather than each other, which keeps call volume lower and success rates higher. And they have two physical rally points, one near the home, one outside the neighborhood. They do not require communication to activate. They require only that everyone knows where to go and at what time to go there. A Harvard analysis of Hurricane Maria found that households with pre-established meeting points had significantly better family reunification outcomes than those who improvised. The data is not ambiguous. The protocol is not expensive. It is one conversation held in advance. Step 4. Every container in the house is filling with water midway through the first hour. Something else is happening in this household that would look strange to an outsider. Every pot on the stove, every sink, the bathtubs, all of them filling simultaneously. Most people think of running water the way they think of gravity, as something that simply exists. It does not. Municipal water systems are electrically dependent infrastructure. They run on pumps. When the grid goes down, water pressure does not disappear immediately, but it begins to degrade within 2 to 6 hours in most systems, and in some, it fails faster. Post-Katrina documentation showed households that did not fill containers in the first hours going without water for days. Dehydration, hygiene failure, and medication disruption followed quickly. This is not a dramatic failure mode. It is a quiet one, which is why it is so consistently underestimated. The Prepper protocol on water is a strict sequence. Fill everything available immediately without waiting to assess whether it will be needed. The cost of filling containers unnecessarily is zero. The cost of not filling them in a scenario where water goes out is severe and irreversible. Some preppers keep a water bob, a bathtub bladder that holds up to 100 gallons, stored specifically for this window. But the behavior matters more than the tool. What you are watching is a household that treats the first 30 minutes of a grid-down event as the only window to secure water. Because it is. Step 5, no candles, not yet. This is the step most people find genuinely surprising. The lights are off. The instinct for almost anyone is to find a candle. This household does not light one. Not in the first hour. The National Fire Protection Association tracks residential fire incidents across major grid-down events. The data is consistent. Fires spike immediately after power loss, not because of the event itself, but because of improvised lighting in stressed households where attention is divided, children are moving in the dark, and no fire response infrastructure is functioning. Fire in a scenario without municipal water pressure and without fire department response is a category-ending event. It is not a setback. It ends the scenario. What this household uses instead is pre-positioned headlamps, not stored in a drawer but mounted at known locations throughout the house, accessible in total darkness by feel alone. Headlamps over handheld flashlights because they keep both hands free. Battery lanterns for room-level ambient light. Open flame is permitted only after the situation has been stabilized and assessed. The rule is not dogmatic. It is probabilistic. In the first hour, when cognitive load is highest and the nature of the event is still unknown, a candle introduces a risk that has no equivalent upside. You carry this knowledge now. It costs nothing to act on it. Step 6. The neighbor nobody talks about. This is the step that challenges the dominant image of what a prepper is. Every popular piece of survival content romanticizes the lone figure, the individual with the stockpile, the skills, the isolated retreat. It is cinematic. It is also, according to documented collapse behavior, consistently wrong. Selko Begovic survived the Sarajevo siege during the Bosnian War from 1992 to 1993. 1 year inside a city under complete civil collapse. His documented accounts, widely cited across the preparedness community, are unambiguous on one point. Isolated individuals and isolated families were the most vulnerable. Groups survived. Not large organized groups necessarily. Neighbor-level networks, people who knew who had medical training, who had mechanical skills, who could take a watch rotation. The labor of survival, physical and psychological, cannot be carried by one household indefinitely. What this means practically is not dramatic. It is one conversation held before the event with at least one neighbor, a basic mutual aid understanding, an informal skills inventory, who can do what each household has that the other might need. This costs nothing, It requires no gear. It requires only the acknowledgement that the lone survivor fantasy, while compelling on screen, does not survive contact with documented reality. The preppers you are watching understand this. Their neighborhood relationships are not visible from the outside, but they are there. If what you just heard does not match anything you have seen on other survival channels, that is not an accident. Most content in this space stays inside the fantasy because the fantasy performs better. This channel does not do that. What you are getting here is what the research actually shows, not what sells the aesthetic. If that is the access you want, subscribe, because every video on this channel is built the same way. The insider knowledge, the documented evidence, the gap between what people assume and what actually works. Step 7. The food stays sealed. And what preppers do with food in the first hour is the opposite of what most people would expect. They do not touch their stores. They open the refrigerator. Refrigerated food begins degrading immediately when power is lost. It is the most time-sensitive asset in the household and the one most people ignore in favor of reaching for the supplies they worked hardest to accumulate. The protocol is a strict sequence. Refrigerator first, then the freezer, which will hold temperature for 24 to 48 hours if kept sealed, then the pantry, then long-term stores. Long-term stores are not opened until the duration of the event is assessed, not assumed, assessed. The reason this matters is documented in extended shelter scenarios from Katrina onward. Households that open long-term supplies in the first 24 hours without knowing whether the event would last 2 days or 2 weeks found themselves rationing severely by day 5. The anxiety that drives people toward their supplies in the first hour is real. It is also counterproductive. Eating what is already degrading costs nothing. Preserving what is not yet degrading is a decision with compounding value. Duration assessment before any sealed store is opened. That is the rule. It is not complicated. Most people simply never hear it stated plainly. Step 8. Security starts with observation. The final move, and the one that most directly contradicts the image that prepper content has spent years building. In the first hour, this household security protocol is not armed. It is observational. An exterior check, doors, windows, the immediate perimeter, and a read of the street. What is the neighborhood doing? Is there movement? Are lights on elsewhere, suggesting a localized rather than regional outage? Is there noise that would indicate conflict, or is there quiet? The information gathered in those 3 to 5 minutes determines whether any further security response is warranted. Post-Katrina accounts document something that rarely gets discussed. A measurable number of escalation incidents in the first 24 hours were caused not by actual threats, but by armed posturing between neighbors who were not threats to each other. Misread in the dark and stress with no communication and no prior relationship. The weapon was not the problem. The absence of observation before response was the problem. Experienced preppers separate threat assessment from threat response. Assessment is always the first move. Entry points are secured passively, door bars, window latches, before any other layer is activated. The armed capacity, if it exists, is a last resort layer. It is not the first hour's default. What you carry out of this step is not a firearms doctrine. It is an observation doctrine. Look before you respond. Classify before you act. That principle runs through every step you have watched tonight. Before this video, the first hour after a catastrophic event was probably a blur in your mind, something you would figure out when it happened. You know now that the research says otherwise. 80% of people in documented disaster scenarios enter a stunned and inactive state in the first 10 to 15 minutes. The 10 to 15% who respond adaptively are not calmer by nature. They are prepared by decision. You now know what those decisions look like. That gap between the person who freezes and the person who acts is not a gear gap. It was never a gear gap. It is a knowledge gap. And that gap just closed. The next video on this channel follows where this hour ends. When the first hour is over and the assessment is complete, a different protocol begins. The one that determines whether a household survives the next 72 hours. The decisions made in hours 2 through 4 are where most documented failures occur, and where most survival content says nothing useful. That video is already there. This channel goes where the research goes, not where the fantasy leads.